everybody. Welcome to Having Your Say. I'm Robbie Smith, your host. This program brings you mostly good news stories to inspire, to educate, and inform. So you don't want to miss a single moment of our program. Don't go away. We'll be back after this.
The internet offers wonderful connections, but who's connecting to you? Your personal information could be an easy target for hackers and thieves. But you can protect yourself. Stop and think before you click. And visit staysafeonline.org for ways to keep your information in your hands.
McGruff, the crime dog here. We've all heard of identity theft. Now I'm going to show you how those thieves do it. Watch. He's secretly photographing her credit card with his cell phone. Now watch. They pretend they have a package to deliver, and while they're trying to fit it in the mailbox, they're taking her credit card payments and other paid bills. Now watch this one. What you consider garbage, thieves consider gold. Guard all your personal information carefully. Use a secure mailbox and shred your credit card records and bills. To learn how to protect yourself from identity theft, go to weprevent.org. Keep your identity to yourself and help take a bite out of crime. Brought to you by the National Crime Prevention Council, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the Crime Prevention Coalition of America.
Everybody, welcome to Having Your Say. I'm Robbie Smith. This program brings you mostly good news stories to inspire, educate, and inform. So, as I always mention, you don't want to miss a single moment of this program. Now, if you watched our show last week, then you know we were talking about those days in Chicago back in the 80s and 90s when black people had real power in being politicians, business people, and leaders of organizations. We really made a difference, and Harold Washington, I think, became mayor because of all of the synergy that these different groups had together. So today we're going to continue our discussion. Last week we talked about organizations and the impact that they had. Today we're going to start with black businesses, focusing primarily on black banks, and then talk about other groups. As you know, if you were a depositor at Seaway Bank, then you know that that bank closed last year. So we're going to start our discussion about the time that there were at least 5 black banks in Chicago, and Seaway was at the top of that ladder. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, at one point, they were the largest black African-American owned bank in the country.
And with this, though, I forgot to introduce my guest, so I want to welcome to the show again Darrell Bakeman. She's a business consultant, and Josie Childs, a community activist that everybody knows. So let's continue. Josie, in looking at these black banks, what was happening in the 80s and 90s that we had 5 black banks?
We had black pride. We had black pride. I mean, people would say, you do bank at Seaway, don't you? You know, that it was just, you had to. That was something you were committed to doing, whether it was Seaway, Independence, or the other banks. And both small and large people banked at the bank, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
I think I heard, and you know this story better than I do, but when they were opening Seaway, Stu Collins knocked on some doors and said, you know, we're opening this bank, will you put your money there? And, you know, blacks going into banking business was a new thing, so people naturally wanted to know, can you do it? But they were willing to take the gamble. They had faith in the leadership. And out of that came Seaway.
Now, who are some of these other banks, Darrell?
Well, there's Independence Bank and Highland Bank and, of course, Illinois Service Federal. And I'm probably forgetting one.
You're forgetting Highland.
I said Highland.
Did you say Highland?
Highland, Independence.
Guarantee?
Guarantee. There was the other one.
Oh, okay.
But before we even talk about that, we have to realize that when these banks were being formed or founded, what it looked like in the black community. You see, they didn't want our money. You know, they wanted
mean the majority
the white community
did
didn't
not
want their
want-
money, and the banking laws were such that you had to have community banks. Those laws went away. There was a time when what it was called First Chicago couldn't bank on the south side of Chicago. They had to bank downtown. When Bank of America, which was another bank, I forgot the name of it, couldn't bank on the south side.
Yes.
So there was a community banking law that was
Investment
created.
law, yes.
That's right. And so that was also that was why you could have a community bank that was owned by an African American. Now, getting the capital together was different. But because we stuck together in those days, it was a lot easier than one might think. And remember, Seaway was on 87th Street. Mm-hmm. On 87th Street, it was a real hub for black businesses. You had Seafart Realty, you had Johnson Products, you had...
And so you come down that 87th Street strip, you had Johnson Product, you had Seaway, you had Dempsey Travis, which was Seavart,
right,
and you had Soft Sheen, all on 87th
Soft
Street.
Sheen
And
came
Cam
later.
and Nate.
And Cam and
Yes,
Nate, but I
that's-
can keep going. You had Neely Brothers Shell Station. So the whole strip was lined with black-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the bowling alley, because Jacoby and Steve
That's right.
Collins owned the bowling alley.
Daddy
Weren't there
O'Daly.
some-
Daddy
What
O'Daly.
about
Mhm.
some,
That's
weren't
right.
there some car dealerships around there someplace?
Well,
No?
the car dealerships were not on 87th
87th
Street.
Maybe on State?
They were...
I forgot. Duke's Oldsmobile. Well, let's talk about. We were talking about banks.
Yeah,
I'm
let's
kidding.
keep our
Okay,
banks. So,
go to-
but the whole community mindedness existed. It was not hard to raise capital from black people who had money. Plus, you have to remember, the black businesses couldn't borrow money from the majority banks.
Right.
So this was also one of the main driving forces for why Seaway Bank was so significant, because they wanted to be able to have access to capital. So once they own the bank, you know, you have to have deposits and you have to have loans. People could get car loans, people could get mortgages, people could get business loans. And so Seaway became really more of a business institution than I think even Highland and probably Independence were. Both of them had business people who were involved in the bank, but for sure Seaways was really driven by people like Stu, Daddy O'Daly, and Jacoby, who were business owners.
And I want to take a moment, though, to talk about the character and type of black men who were leading institutions or banks businesses at that time.
that's important.
They were certain kind of people. They took pride in their blackness, and they wanted black people to move up.
Absolutely.
So tell us about Jacoby Dickens. I know he was Stu Collins and Jacoby. Were they partners at Seaway at one time?
Well, my understanding is Daddy-O and Jacoby owned the bowling alley across the street. And of course, they put their money into the bank. And I know that Stu Collins brought Jacoby Dickens into the bank, and Jacoby became one of the major investors of the bank. And that's the relationship that I'm
And it
familiar with.
evolved into, at the end, Jacoby was the chairman and major
Correct.
owner of the bank.
The major chair, the major stockholder.
Stockholder of the
of
bank.
the bank.
Right.
And it was but Stu Collins paved the way for Jacoby. Now, you might know more about Independence than I do, because I know you know the Bouttes well.
Yeah, I know the Bouttes. There was Al Boutte, George Johnson. Tell you a story about when you were saying that we
George
couldn't...
was with Seaway.
No, George was...
George
Oh,
Johnson.
George
Johnson.
George
The
Johnson
hair
was-
care.
Yeah.
Okay.
At History Makers the other night, speaking of George Johnson and being able to make loans, Eric Johnson spoke, and he said when George Johnson was trying to get his first loan to go into business, there were two of them. They needed $500, and they were getting $250 each. The other guy got his, I don't know who it was, but George went to a bank to borrow $250 to go into business. They checked his credit. Everything was great, but they said, but we are not going to make this loan for your protection. You don't know business, da-da-da-da-da, and this is to save you. George went the next day to the same bank at a different location and said, I need $250 to take my family on vacation, and they gave him the loan.
Yes, you could get a car. You could get a car loan quicker than you can an investment, and you're going into a bank. Now, I want to just because time moves so quickly. During that time, I know working at Amoco from a secretary up to being in community affairs, that black major corporations were also investing or putting money or supporting these banks as well. Like Highland Community Bank, I know the department that I work in, George Bakeman was my boss, Phil Drotning, you remember Drotning, they were very close. There was so much that major corporations were doing to help build black businesses, like the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council that exists today was really started by Amoco and some East Coast companies. It used to be the National Minority Purchasing Council, remember? And now it's something else. But that history has been lost in so many ways, because I know all the things that my boss used to do to make sure that black businesses around the country got say business from like Amoco or Standard Oil or whatever we were at that time.
Well, what's nice about that is you can name drop the person who was the head of Highland Bank. You can name drop the person who was the head of Independence Space. You can name drop the person who was the head of Seaway. Not just because they had that title, but because they were involved in the political and the civic activities of the community. They were visible. They helped to support the politicians by chairing their campaigns, either from a funding perspective or from another leadership perspective. In addition to that, yes, the white community invested, but the black banks knew the black community. If you put your money in the bank and they knew you had a cleaners, then they knew that you were a reputable business that you could make a loan to. The majority banks didn't know black people walking in. Like you said, George, he walked in and said he wanted a business. They looked at him like he was crazy, but when he walked in to go on a trip, he was fine. So that lets you know that the importance of having those institutions and those individuals running those institutions had everything to do with their connectedness to the community and the community's connectedness to them. And that's what made the difference. Jacoby was everywhere because he bowled at the bowling alley. And then when he was the chairman of the bank and they could say, oh yeah, I know Jacoby, they would name drop Jacoby's name like he lived next door to them. And in their minds, they had that kind of access to him. And I'm sure that's true of George.
It was certainly true of Marshall Bynum, because he was the funeral director and had buried almost everybody in the family. So everybody knew that funeral director was a board member at Independence Bank, and they related to him because he related to them when they had their sorrows and things like that.
You know, as we discuss this, it kind of gets back to what I said. Cliff Kelly always says that integration was the worst thing that happened to us. And we think of how our businesses, when we got the choice, the opportunity to make a choice of whether to shop in the community or outside of the community, then I think in the back of our mind we felt, oh, we've been deprived so long, so we don't need to be doing business with each other. Let's go downtown because we've never had that before.
Worse than that, when Bank of America moved on 87th and Stony Island, people took their money out. Oh, I want to bank with the white people, because they felt that the white people were better. Where does that come from? You know, we're better. Oh, now they're here, so we can do this with them. Not understanding what it meant to keep your money in a black bank. Not having any connectedness to your community meant that you were slowly unraveling your community.
Yes.
And without any comprehension of what it meant.
Yes.
But the other point of having these when Seaway, we did a little quick forensic on Seaway because I was in Arizona, Josie was here, and we were on the phone half the day and night trying to figure out what can we do, what can we do?
We're talking, everybody, in case we're going around in circles, we're talking about the recent last year when Seaway Bank on 87th Street, they really had 10 locations, 10 branches. And the main facility is on 87th Street in Chicago. And the bank closed, was bought over by the State Bank of Texas, and it happened overnight. And me and everyone else just couldn't believe that this had happened because Seaway was the #1 black bank in Chicago. I remember the years when it was the top black bank in the country. So it was such a surprise. So you can continue what you were saying. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood.
Well, I called my black activist friend Josie Childs because when I read it and heard about it, I was just sick over the fact that Seaway was closing. I couldn't believe it. You know, I knew that there were some issues because the bank regulators had given them these 2 failing banks and they couldn't quite pull themselves out of, that scenario. But I had no idea what could have possibly caused the demise of one of our largest banking institutions. I was sick over it. So we got on the phone and started calling people. We called people we thought were leaders. We called activists. We called people that we thought could make some noise and figure out what happened and what could we do. And it was really kind of sad and frustrating because we were really too late to do anything.
Yes.
When we started checking on things, if we had created this groundswell of enthusiasm about the bank being in trouble, then maybe we could have prevented the regulators from thinking it was so easy to close our remaining large African American owned bank. And unfortunately, we were too late to do anything.
Yes.
Because by the time the regulators the ink had dried on the paper, that was late. We should have been involved a long time ago. But there was no organizing force that we could have gone to that could have had an impact that the regulators would have paid attention to.
Well, you see, I think too, it gets back to the disconnect that blacks have kind of evolved into over the years, because if we were still connected in the right way, the right people would have known what was going on, and the message could have gotten out.
Absolutely.
And what was so astounding to me
that goes back to Reverend Jackson.
Yes.
That goes back to Reverend Jackson and his role.
Yes, that's right. Yes, but a lot of people want to dismiss Reverend Jackson, but I still think that he can make a phone call that nobody else can make. He can get an answer to. And I think we have to take advantage of that or use it if we still can. You know, guys, we're talking about banks. We're going to have to move on.
Yeah, I know.
You want to make one last point?
No, I was going to say that he does have a megaphone to the political community, the business community, and the community organizing group, the people who will pick it.
And he has recently built this real tight relationship with people, the leaders in Silicon Valley.
Well, he's building relationships.
And he did it. The strategy, as you know, he started over 25 years ago buying pieces of stock in all of these top companies, and then he would have a right to go in at their annual meetings and express his discontent.
Why do we think he's so underestimated?
I think the media helped to create this because from this point...
That's a separate show.
What they would say, I'll just say this, the way they helped to create it is that they would always say, Josie Jackson always trying to get before the cameras. And black people repeated that over and over again. Okay, with that, we're gonna move on. I just want to, after we've talked about black banks, but I just want to list some of the other banks that we had that gave us power during the 80s and